Hello, everyone, and we are back with another episode of Minding My Mental Health. I am Tenethrea Williams, and I am a licensed professional counselor and mindset coach. Thank you guys for joining. We're going to give people a few moments to join us. Today, we are in for a treat. We're going to have another Q&A. We're going to go ahead and share this. So if you are watching, you know what I want you to do. I want you to hashtag live and let me know where you're watching from. I also want you to share this broadcast to groups you belong to, tag friends and family, all of that. We want to get people in here because we're doing again another live Q&A. We had so much fun with the last one, and we believe that the more information we can get out, the better we are. So okay, so just take a moment and share this to groups that you belong to. Okay, I'm going to share it to a couple groups myself. And let's see. Also, because we are doing Q&A, most of the questions have already been submitted. But if you have a question, go ahead and you can send that to my inbox. I would love to be able to answer that question for you on air. If I can't get it this round, we'll make sure we get it the next time that we have Q&A. Okay. There we go. All right. So we're going to go ahead again and say thank you and remind everybody that this is the live Q&A. So if you have a question, if you don't want your name on the question, submit it to my inbox. I will not read your name. We want to make sure that we have enough, the confidentiality and all of that stuff for our broadcast. Okay. So again, let's go ahead and get started. So the first question we have listed was with the I guess the importance of mental health being more in the limelight or in the spotlight. A lot of times we are getting a lot more mental health questions, and that's a great thing. Having more awareness about mental health is very important. One of the things that we are noticing is that a lot of mental health terminology is also being spoken of in our everyday language. And so this question is submitted saying, hey, we hear terms like narcissism. We hear that all the time, and we hear gaslighting a lot. And so the question says, can you give real life examples of narcissism and gaslighting versus what people say all the time? And this question actually was submitted at our last Q&A, and I missed that question. So I wanted to start with that question because we want to make sure that we answer that. Again, if you're watching, let me know where you're watching from. Hashtag live if you're watching live, and hashtag replay to let us know where you're watching from. I'm going to actually tag a few people myself. Okay. So again, that question is, can you give us real life examples of narcissism and gaslighting versus what people say all the time? So let's just talk about that for a moment. Narcissism is really, when we're talking about narcissistic personality disorder, it involves several different traits. And it's mostly, hey, Tina, mostly about people who have these traits in severe kind of forms. So a lot of this behavior, I think this is why it's so common. You can see some of these traits in a lot of different people. Thank you so much, Tracy. You can see these traits in a lot of different people. So I want us to make sure that just because we see these traits, we're not trying to operate as a licensed professional and start diagnosing everybody just because we see these traits, right? So this particular question is talking about narcissism. And I say this all the time. So many times people come into the office, and as they are talking, especially if they're talking about some type of breakup or divorce, they often say, my ex was a narcissist. And is that possible? Absolutely. Your ex may have had narcissistic traits or personality disorder. However, a lot of times we see one or two traits and we're ready to diagnose someone. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between just some of those behaviors and an actual diagnosis. So an individual with personality disorder will typically have extremely high or exaggerated sense of self-importance. Again, we're not just talking about someone who's a little arrogant or conceited, but this is extremely high. They have a strong desire to be admired, and virtually all of the time they struggle to have empathy for others. So if it's really hard for them to have empathy for other people, they need to be the center of attention all the time. Those are some traits. However, behind the grandiose feelings, their feelings of superiority and excessive confidence is actually really weak. It's actually not grounded um, in truth. It's really fragile. So they exaggerate their sense of importance, but really they're really suffering with a lot of confidence issues. And typically they cannot stand any kind of criticism. They will lash out really hard when people criticize them. Individuals become very envious when other people receive praise or validation. Again, they always want to be the center of attention. People with narcissistic personality disorder often will try to belittle other people around them to make themselves feel better. So if you're seeing this, again, when you start to see this, especially in adults, it's very problematic. These individuals tend to put their feelings, their thoughts, their needs, their desires above everybody else. Now, we understand that is important, that you're able to say, hey, I have needs too. But this person is basically saying, get what you need. We're going to make sure that I get my needs first. So one of the things that we're talking about is distinguishing, because again, you may see some of these traits here or there. It's important that we recognize that just because you see a trait here or there doesn't mean someone has narcissism or narcissistic personality. When you're dealing with the diagnosis, usually they will struggle with two important sections. One is impairment in self-functioning. So either they have an excessive reference to others for self-definition. So they're totally dependent on someone else to tell them how great they are. They're needing that constant validation all of the time. They depend on that. They're needing those things. They also have goal setting is based on gaining the approval of others. So when they set a goal, it's not just because of an internal desire to help others or to help do something positive. They need that because they need to have that sense of reassurance. Again, I see people jumping on. If you have a question and you have not submitted your question, go ahead and submit that question to my inbox, and we will try, if we have time, we'll make sure we get your questions answered on air today. I will not read your name, so you don't have to worry about being exposed or anything like that. We will maintain confidentiality as we're going through this Q&A. So we're looking at the impairments of self-functioning. Also, they have typically a lot of impairments in their relationships. So they have a hard time being empathetic. It's hard for them to even recognize how other people may feel. It's hard for them to care about how other people may feel. So they don't identify well with feelings of others, and they excessively are in tune to the reaction of others. Always paying attention. Did someone like somebody else's comment more? Did they do this to me? Did they give me enough praise? They're needing that. In their intimate relationships are typically very superficial. All they really want you to do is serve them. It's all about what works better for them. It's all about regulating their emotions. It's not a mutual, let me help you, you help me. They don't care about helping you. They typically want to just serve themselves. So here are 9 characteristics. If you are going to have a diagnosis, the person will have to have at least 5 of these 9 characteristics. So I'm going to read these off really quickly. So they have an inflated sense of self-esteem or grandiose sense of self-improvement or superiority. They crave attention. A lot of people like to be the center of attention. That doesn't mean that they are narcissistic. These people crave it. They will go out of their way to be the center of attention. They're exploited in their relationships. It means they may use manipulation. They will exploit the relationship in any way that benefits them. They will exploit their position. If it's a parent-child, they will exploit the fact that they are the parent. If it's a spouse, they may exploit the fact that they're the man, or they may exploit the fact that they are the woman in the relationship. They have, again, little to no empathy. They're easily disturbed. They cannot handle criticism or any type of feedback that is not glowing reviews and recommendations. They don't have strong attachments. Their intimacy, they don't connect well with people. They usually feel a sense of depression and emptiness when they're not being validated. Their whole sense of self is based on somebody else kind of hyping them up all the time. They have a sense of entitlement. That's a big one. When someone is dealing with a narcissistic personality, they feel like they are entitled to whatever it is that they're wanting. It doesn't matter if they've not worked for it. It doesn't matter if you've worked for it. They feel that they are entitled to that. And then the number 9 is they can feel others they feel like others are envious of them, even when others may not even be thinking about them. So again, they have to have at least 5 of those to be diagnosed as narcissistic personality. Not just have them, but it has to be in a sense that is impairing their life in some way. So I hope that answers your question. So people, just because you see someone and they like attention doesn't mean that they are a narcissist. Just because someone is entitled at times doesn't mean that they are a narcissist. But again, if you have enough of these traits and it's hard for you to connect, those are probably some signs that you are dealing with someone who has narcissism. Now, the next term that the person asked about was gaslighting. Go ahead and put a 1 in the comment if you've heard someone say somebody else is gaslighting them, or if you've even said someone is gaslighting me. So we're going to talk about that term just for a moment. Gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse in which a person or a group, now that's important because sometimes when we think gaslighting, we only think individualistic, but it can be a person or a group, causes someone to question their own sanity, their own memories, or their perception of reality. People who experience gaslighting may feel confused, anxious, and they may think they can't trust themselves. Yes, it's a pretty popular term. I see the ones in the comment section. It's a pretty popular term. They're gaslighting. So it's important, number one, to know that you can gaslight someone without trying to, right? But typically when we're talking about the term itself, there is a level of intentionality associated with it, okay? So you can do it, but when we're talking about the terms in psychological terms, we're typically talking intentional, right? So there are different types of gaslighting that and honestly, when you hear some of these, you're going to say, oh, I've done that to someone, or someone has done that to me, because they're all pretty common. The problem is when you start to see a pattern of these behaviors, okay? So the one is countering. So that's when someone has you question your own memory. Are you sure they said it like that? Did it really happen that way? You have a bad memory. So you're making someone question if they remember things the right way. Again, a lot of us may have done that. I know sometimes you're talking to people and you're like, now, did it happen just that way? When your kids are telling you a story, sometimes you're like, now, did your teacher say that? You're trying to get an understanding. And so you have to be really mindful not to start beating yourself up if you hear that you have some of these behaviors. You also want to be mindful that you don't continue to do these things because they can be damaging to the person who is on the receiving end of them. Withholding is another way that people gaslight, and it involves where you're pretending that you don't understand. I don't even know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. You're just dismissing what they're saying, basically, or you're trivializing it and you're belittling what they're feeling. So it says, you're just being too sensitive. You're too this, you're too that. Those types of forms are called gaslighting. Denial, just saying something did not happen that happened, and they know happened, but they will deny that. Why? The goal is to make you start to question your own reality. Denial is important. Like, that didn't happen. That never happened. Now, again, this is really important to distinguish between different perceptions and just differing of memories. You can have a brother and a sister and they're sitting down talking about their childhood, and one is saying, that's not how that happened. I remember mom never did this, and they may remember things differently. Don't just start yelling out at your brother that they are gaslighting you, or your sister that they are gaslighting you. There may be different memories, different perceptions, and actually research has shown that we remember things even inaccurately at times. So it's important that we don't just jump to saying someone's gaslighting us when there's just a slight difference. Typically, gaslighting is intentional. Typically, gaslighting is they're trying to make you think that you are crazy. It's not just a difference of details, whether it was a red shirt or a blue shirt. They're telling you that your dad was actually always there for you through everything, and your dad never showed up for you. That may be a form of gaslighting because they're trying to get you to question your reality for their benefit. Another type of gaslighting is stereotyping. For example, if you say, I'm going to tell if you try to abuse me, and they'll say, people don't believe women. That is, I'm going to go ahead and discredit you before you will even step out there. So I hope that answers the question. So the fact is, there are many people that say gaslighting, and in fact, it may be gaslighting, but there are also times where it's just a perspective difference. And so we have to be mindful of those things. The key is when you feel like you're being gaslit, to ask yourself, how am I feeling? Because the thing about gaslighting, it starts to make you feel crazy. You can argue with your brother and you never feel crazy. You just think he doesn't know what he's talking about, right? So you don't have to worry so much because it's hard to tell. It's a fine line where you're talking about gaslighting, intentionality or not. All of that is a fine line. The key is to ask yourself, do I feel confused about my reality? The other thing to do is to step away from the situation for just a few minutes, or for a while, and calm yourself and figure out, okay, saying this because we just simply disagree about this, or are they saying this because they have an ulterior motive to try to, alter what I'm believing and what I'm feeling? The next thing, and I think this one is really important, look for evidence with an open mind. So you look for evidence. If they are coming to you and they're saying dad was involved in our lives, and they show you stacks of pictures from every birthday party, every recital, everything, and dad is right there, you go, you know what, maybe I just blocked some things out. But if they're going, no, he was there, I remember, and you're like, I don't remember that at all, that's okay for you to stick to what you remember, because again, someone else may be trying to pull the wool over your eyes. And the last thing is, be assertive and use your voice. You don't have to just say, because someone else doesn't remember it, that it didn't happen. You can still stay true to your story. But if there is evidence on the contrary, don't be so stuck to your story that you can't be open to a different perspective as well. Okay, so that was one question. I know that was a really long answer, but I do think that's one of those topics that we people throw out these terms a lot. They don't always have a clear understanding of what they're saying, and sometimes what it does is it actually waters down people's openness to hear when it's coming from an actual professional, or when there is actual a real situation. They just throw it in the that's just the pop term right now. So it is important that we have an understanding of some of the terms we use. The next question. I'm going to look here to make sure I haven't received any questions in my inbox. If you have a question, make sure that you let me know. The next question says, in your opinion, where do you think the shift occurred to where Christians and church leaders not only embrace, but openly advocate for people to go to therapy? So I do think there is, things are shifting in the community. It used to be very much that you didn't hear people in the church advocating for therapy. And I do think things are shifting. I don't think that is widespread across the board. I still think there are a lot of churches, a lot of pastors who don't advocate for people to seek help outside of the church. However, I did, to answer the question, I did look into some things, and it says religious counseling and support has been around, obviously, forever. People go to, I lost a little bit of my lighting. Hopefully we can get that back on. It's been around for a really long time, right? But around the 1930s, after the war, a lot of more people, when they came home from the war, they were needing help. And so they started to go to their pastors, going to their pastors. And a lot of their pastors started to feel like, I'm not sure if I have the skill, right? And then there were a lot of they started to see the need, and then it started to become more overlapping, where the church and the community psychological workers were starting to see overlapping. Hey, they need some spirituality here. Hey, they need some other stuff over here. And it started to merge, and there became a formation in the 1930s. It was called the American Foundation of Religion and Psychiatry. And so, but also I think it's also key to note that the Christian journals in the time of research, they were showing that pastors stopped using as much Christian language and started using a more inclusive language. And so I think it was an easier transition for that, because I stopped saying God as much, and they may say things like love as opposed to God. And so sometimes when those things started to change, it started being more acceptable in and out of the church. And I think that's where some of the mixing starts going. Now, I am a Christian and I am a licensed professional. I believe that it is always important to know your realm or your competence level and your scope of practice, whether you are a pastor or you are in the profession. As a professional, they will tell us, do not operate outside of your scope of practice or outside of your competency. So if I don't know a lot about a certain topic, it is best for me to refer. Likewise, pastors, if there is some stuff and you're dealing with it, and hey, this is outside of my wheelhouse, it's okay it's not a slight, it's not shame to say, hey, I think you need to talk to someone who is better equipped to help you. And a lot of times, in many pastoral settings, it is okay for those pastors to say, hey, it seems like there's some other stuff going on. you may need to seek some professional help. It's also okay to say, hey, there needs to be some deliverance. And if you're a pastor that says, hey, I know very little about deliverance, and someone else does know about deliverance, it's okay to say, hey, you should talk to these people, which is why I think pastors, counselors need to have a network of people when it comes to professionals, that we can refer, so that people are getting the best care for them. And I do believe that God will lead us in various different professions so that we can have good people that we can refer people to. All right, is this helping everybody? Go ahead and put comments, questions, tag, share this broadcast. Number 3, let's look this. All right, the next question, I said number 3 because I have it labeled. The next question I have is, how can I stop feeling bad when I try to establish boundaries? I always feel guilty. This is a pretty common type of issue when you're talking about mental health. Boundaries is huge, huge, huge when it comes to protecting and maintaining healthy mental status. So what I would say is, most of the time when people feel bad about establishing boundaries, it's because they also identify whatever they are doing as mean. They identify it as being selfish. And so the first thing I would say is to begin to reframe the way you see boundaries. Reframe the way you see it. Forget about how other people see the boundary. Reframe the way you see the boundary. Because if you see the boundary as being mean, of course it's going to be difficult for you to maintain that boundary. And if you see the boundary as being mean or selfish, you're probably not going to even begin to implement it in the first place. Right. So you have to see it, stop seeing it as being mean, to start seeing it as being responsible for your own mental health. And here's an example. It's a pretty common example I use a lot, but I think it works for the situation. The example is, if you tell your sister, who always asks you for a ride to work at the last minute, which means you now have to be stressed out because you have to try to rearrange your schedule, your life, to make sure that your sister can get to work. If you say, hey, I don't mind taking you to work, but you need to give me advance notice. When you get your schedule, let me know when you're going to need a ride so that I'm not scrambling the day of trying to get you to work, right? You say that to your sister and you tell her, hey, if you continue to wait until the last minute, I won't be able to do that. If she continues to wait until the last minute, it is not mean for you to say, I cannot do that because it stresses me out, or I'm not able to do the things that I need to do because I'm now having to rework my schedule around you, when at the very least, all you had to do was let me know in advance. That is not mean, and that is protecting your mental health, because it's not okay for you to be all stressed out about something that could be prevented when you're actually trying to help someone else, right? And so sometimes what we see as mean is actually just us being uncomfortable because for so long we have not had boundaries. And so it feels awkward. And that's the thing. If you're not a person who has typically established boundaries, it may feel awkward initially. What I would say is to continue to practice. The more you practice establishing boundaries, the better you are with maintaining and keeping those. Also know that anytime you establish boundaries, people that have benefited from your lack of boundaries will push back. People that have benefited from you not having boundaries will not like you having boundaries. So be prepared for that pushback. Be prepared for people saying, I don't like it when you say no to me. If you give a child who's never had a bedtime, that child is not willingly going to just say, oh, okay, well, cool. They are going to have to get used to it. But guess what? If you maintain the boundary, that child will not only get used to it, they will actually start to get sleepy around the time that you have established. So you have to just be consistent with your boundaries, with your family members, with your job, with whoever, because other people will have to adapt or they will just pull away. So you don't have to feel guilty for taking care of your mental health. Very good question. Establishing boundaries really does show you the people that you had free reign with. Yes. Or that have free reign with you. Absolutely, it does. When you do that, because people will get upset if they've always been able to do something. If they've always been able to just text you and ask you for money and you just gave it to them without question. And you begin to say, no, I'm not going to just keep giving you money if you're not going to do things differently in your life. They're going to be upset with you and they're going to say, I thought you were a Christian, or I thought you were kind, or I thought you cared about me, or all of those things. You have to be mindful not to allow that type of manipulation to cause you to feel guilty. Again, I think that's really important to recognize that you will get pushback. That doesn't mean you're on the wrong path because you have pushback. Doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. It just means you have to ask yourself, why would this person want me to establish boundaries, or why wouldn't they want me to establish boundaries? And you're going to get a lot of insight. Why don't they want me to establish boundaries? Because now they can't manipulate me anymore. Why don't they want me to establish boundaries? Because now they're not getting what they want. And sometimes, again, you have to recognize when people genuinely have a need or when they are just taking advantage of you, and you were never designed to just be a doormat for anyone. Okay, so very good. Go ahead. Let me see give me some more questions. I have a couple more questions here already, but I want to make sure that if you all have a question that you send it to my inbox, and that's Tenethrea Williams, and I will get that. So the next question says, what does healing look like after a breakup? I keep thinking I'm healed, but when I get in the next relationship, I realize I still have a lot of work. So, okay, I'm going to read that again. What does healing look like after a breakup? I keep thinking I'm healed, but when I get in the next relationship, I realize I still have a lot of work. So what I would say to that is, it doesn't matter what relationship you're in, you're going to have a lot of work. Okay, relationships, if they are going to be successful, it is going to take some work, and it's going to take some intentional work for those relationships to be successful. So realizing that you have work to do is not necessarily a sign that you are not healed. So healing can take place in layers, right? And what do I mean when I say layers? I had my little girl by C-section, which meant I had to go through surgery for birthing her. Well, research and all the doctors and everyone says it takes 6 weeks for you to be healed from the C-section. Well, 6 weeks came and gone. I was able to drive. I was able to carry on my daily life activities. However, well after 6 weeks, it was still sensitive around my incision site. Well after 6 weeks, even years later, I would find myself, if I'm tickling my daughter or kind of playing rough and we're doing things, I had to be really cautious because I could feel that my body was not 100% back to normal, right? So I say that to say, just because you're experiencing some things that are feeling a little off doesn't mean some level of healing has not taken place, right? And so you may be healing, and some parts have already healed. So just because you have work to do does not mean that you have not healed or that you're not in the process of healing. So again, I think that's really important. But the other things, I think there are some indicators that show that healing is taking place or has taken place. And one of those things I say is, are you able to look at a situation from a more logical and objective standpoint rather than purely emotion? Okay. So when you look back at that relationship, are you able to say, this is really what happened. We were both really young, and I had this going on and they had this going on. This is really what happened. We had too much involvement from outside family members, and we did not set up appropriate boundaries. Like, are you able to look at it from an objective, logical perspective, or are you still purely driven by the emotion? They did me wrong. I can't stand them. That is a pretty good sign you probably still need to heal. Recognizing that, you had some immaturity or some mistakes, recognizing that they had some, and recognizing how those things interact together is important. So I think that's one thing, being able to look at the situation from a logical perspective. The other thing I think is being able to take responsibility for your role in that relationship. That doesn't mean if someone cheated on you that it was your fault. But being able to, again, look at the whole totality of the relationship and take responsibility for your role. I stayed in a situation when I saw 1,000 red flags, or I ignored those red flags, or I was really immature in this way, and this is how I responded, which I knew would trigger this person. So being able to take responsibility for your role in a relationship, to me, is a great sign of healing. Being able to forgive yourself and others, again, another sign that you are either already healed or in the healing process. When you're able to forgive yourself for those, once you take responsibility, that you're able to say, yeah, I did. I forgive myself for ignoring those red flags, or I forgive myself for being immature. I forgive myself for operating out of desperation, or I forgive myself for cheating. I forgive myself for lying or manipulating. I recognize I did those things. I forgive myself. And this is, to me, one of the most important parts. that you are able to learn from your experience, right? So you look back and you say, that's where I messed up. I forgive myself, because this is never about healing, is never about condemning yourself and making yourself feel bad. Healing is about being able to say, this is what happened. I can not deny, I don't have to deny what happened, but I also don't have to get stuck in what happened. And so you learn from that mistake, and you're able to move forward without the those heavy emotions such as bitterness and anger and resentment, all of those types of things. Healing says I'm able to acknowledge what happened, and I'm able to continue my life experiencing the joy that the future holds for me. I hope that answered the question. That's actually all I have. Let me see if I have any more questions from anyone. You guys, let me know if you have any questions. I'm looking here. Is this helpful? You guys, let me know. Is this helpful? Are you learning anything? I'm going to give it just a few moments to see if people are submitting a question. I'm not seeing any more questions. Let's see. I got a new question down here, or comment. Very helpful and informative. Thank you, Everett. Do you guys have any questions that you want to submit before we end our Q&A for today? Now, I also want to say how important I think it is. I'm going to try to do a Q&A. I don't know if I'm going to do once a month or once every couple months during the Q&A, because I do think it's important that people are able to ask their questions. I also want to encourage you guys, if you have not, I have a couple of programs that are available, and I want to make sure that everyone is aware of them. It's one for adults and one for children. Basically, they are both accountability circles. And so the adult, that's what it's called, the accountability adult section. It is a monthly charge. And what we're doing is we're meeting twice a month, and we're going over people's personal goals, but we're also just talking about different topics that impact our lives, right? Oh, I'm sorry, 3 times a month. We're talking about those things. And what does that mean? We're looking at growth mindset. We're doing that with the kids as well, and we call that one the growth crew. Our kids are learning. The last 2 sessions with the kids, we talked about the growth mindset, and we also talked about habits of mentally strong people. And what's really beautiful is that I believe if you start to teach your children at an early age how to be mentally strong and how to be mentally tough and how to have a growth mindset, you're going to set them up for an easier path as they are growing. We're trying to begin to raise people up and do that coaching early before they hit those tumultuous years, those early 20s, when we're trying to figure stuff out. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to have everything figured out, but we want to give them a positive jump start. So again, I still don't see any questions. Before we go, I want to just, I don't want to do it and then someone says, oh man, I had a question. Mia, thank you for joining. If this helps you guys, make sure you share it, make sure you tag. I want to continue to spread the word. So again, if you want to sign up for the accountability circle, if you're an adult and you say, I need somewhere where I can go and I can kind of share my thoughts, my feelings, get some feedback from someone who's not going to be judgmental, but they are going to hold me accountable. Someone who is going to push me outside of my comfort zone. Someone who is going to challenge me, but also, again, challenge doesn't mean negativity, right? If you want to do that, you let me know. There's a monthly fee, but it's very powerful. We have that for adults and we have that for children. So, again, I don't see any more questions. I'm not going to prolong. Thank you guys so much for joining. I appreciate this. Join me next week. Put it on your calendar. If you haven't, go ahead and put a one in there. If you're going to put this on your calendar, put on your calendar, Minding My Mental Health, every Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. If you have not subscribed to Tenethrea Williams on YouTube, go and do that. There are a lot of changes. Yes. Thank you, Mia. Put that on your calendar. There are a lot of lot of changes that happen on social media. So I want to make sure that I'm getting my subscribers up on YouTube as well. So make sure that you are doing that. Thank you, Everett. Thank you. Make sure you put a 1 on the comments. Even though this is over, go ahead and share this to a group that you are a part of. Go ahead and share this to your story. Tag any friends or family that may have benefited from these questions. And if you have a question for our next month or the month after that, I'm not sure yet if I'm going to do it monthly or every other month. If you have a question, you don't have to wait for me to post it. Go ahead and send me the question so I can have those lined out so we can have enough questions to answer all of those things. So if you have a mental health question, a relationship question, a question about, life, doesn't mean I have all the answers, but I can give a professional opinion, and I also can help navigate you to help you to find those answers if I don't have those things. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate you joining us. Join me back next week, next Thursday, for another episode of Minding My Mental Health, because we are tearing down the stigma of getting and taking care of our mental health one episode at a time. And we are bringing awareness to mental health issues in our community. Thank you so much. And I will see you next week. Bye-bye.